Welcome to English Unlocked. This series of videos is aimed at supporting students and teachers working on the AQA combined A and AS level English, literature and language, or anyone looking to further their studies. So I'm assuming that you've read the poem. You may even have studied it at GCSE as part of your power and conflict cluster. So you probably already have some opinions about the Duke, but let's do a quick recap anyway. So the poem is in the form of a dramatic monologue. The Duke de Ferrara is speaking to an emissary for a count whose daughter he is soon to marry. The Duke draws attention to a portrait of his previous wife, hidden from public view, and invites the emissary to admire the picture. It's unclear whether it's the beauty of the painting or his wife, or both, that he's showing off. The mood changes as he lists the Duchess's perceived failings and climaxes with the seeming admission that he had her killed. He then almost seamlessly moves on to talk about the generosity of the Count and casually points out another piece in his valuable art collection as they leave the gallery. So, what are we looking for in the poem? We are looking specifically for the construction of poetic voice. So, this is something a little bit different to what we've studied at GCSE. This part of the subject content is about the nature and function of the poetic voice, how events are portrayed, the telling of events, and the presentation of people. So, in studying the role of language in the construction of perspective, you will need to look at four things: the presentation of time, the importance of place, how people and their relationships are realised, and the presentation of events. So, probably the most important elements here are people and relationships and the presentation of events, although arguably the location of the portrait is also of consequence. How much focus you place on each will depend on the question and which poem that you choose for comparison. So, I'm sure you already have some opinions about the Duke's character, but here are some possible descriptions. He could be controlling, jealous, arrogant, paranoid, proud, powerful, obsessive. All possible descriptions. But the key question for you to answer is how? How does Browning achieve this linguistically? All right, your job is to decode the text and find both linguistic and literary devices that Browning has used to create this character of the Duke. Remember that although the narrative is based loosely on chronicled events in Renaissance Italy, this is essentially a fictional character created by Browning. So let's look at our first criteria, the importance of place. So we have our Deictic Centre, this private art gallery. We can infer that it's a gallery containing a valuable art collection which belongs to the Duke. The use of proximal spatial deixis and the possessive pronoun indicate this. That's My Last Duchess hanging on the wall. Basically, he is the centre of his world. He wants beautiful things around him for himself to enjoy. He even directs the emissary when to sit and stand and where to look. Unlike his Duchess, of course, whose looks went everywhere, he is controlling the emissary. And we've got this use of imperative framed within a politeness strategy. Will please you sit and look at her? This is a command, not an invitation, but it's couched in this polite language. We have to think about, why does he want the emissary to sit and look at his ex? Normally, the last thing most people want to be reminded of at the start of a new relationship is our predecessor. So, what's the Duke's motivation in so seemingly tactless an action? Well, it's obviously an indirect warning to his new bride, but why not just have a marriage contract drawn up? Here we have to consider the patriarchal expectations of women. And don't forget, he's a man of power and is very psychologically complex and manipulative. So he wouldn't just come out and make these demands. He wants to manipulate the situation and do it all indirectly. We're also reminded of the proximal existence of the Count, whose ear this is ultimately for. Although the emissary is his direct audience, is all going to be passed on. So when he says we'll meet the company below, this is more importance of place. So we have to think to ourselves, what's the emissary going to report back? What will the Duchess in waiting be told? Will the marriage be a success? Browning has created these characters that exist beyond the narrative of the poem. We can try to speculate about how things are going to pan out. And then after he sort of drops this bombshell about his countess's smiles stopped, he then just casually carries on his conversation, talking about Neptune taming a seahorse that was cast in bronze for him. This is just a little extra to drive the message home in case there was any doubt. So we can see there is an importance of the location in this conversation. So then we come to the presentation of events. Now, of course, the use of dramatic monologue is key. As the speaker, it is the Duke's story. The Duchess isn't even named. She doesn't have any kind of say in this. All we know is how the Duke sees things. So, of course, we're invited to sympathise with him. And he isn't interrupted. He's just able to talk and talk and talk, even though he alludes to a question that the emissary may have asked him. He doesn't ask him anything. It's just the Duke talking. So, this first person account, as I say, it invites us to sympathise in a way that a third person account may not. Although, of course, we can read between the lines and we can see the truth, the sinister truth behind what he's actually saying. It's unlikely that Browning really wanted him to appear as a sympathetic character. There are, of course, two recipients of the Duke's diatribe. Well, three, I suppose. You've got the emissary primarily, and then through him, the Count, and us as secondary receivers. So in the Duke's version of events, this Duchess, she's too flirtatious, she's too free with her attention, didn't value him and his position, didn't set him aside for special attention. It all sounds very needy, doesn't it? But he feels all of this is justified in stopping her smiles. And don't forget, it's his idea of him as a patriarchal figure and as a man of power. He has expectations of women and he feels perfectly justified. Now, in this poem, Browning develops an idiolect for Ferrara that kind of undermines his presentation of events. So these little ticks define his idiolect, but also his mind, circling back to the same topic again and again. He takes pride in saying, I repeat, just to drive his message home. And he's also obsessed about his height relative to others. He stands because the Duchess stands on the wall. He requires his listener to sit, to rise, to walk downstairs with him side by side. He abhors stooping because he would lose face. And that last, Ferrara needs to control the eyes of others. He curtains off the Duchess's portrait to prevent her from looking everywhere. He tells his listener to look at her and also later to notice Neptune. It's all about control for the Duke. So this idiolect we can look at in a little bit more detail here. So we've got this idea of the gift, stooping, glancing, all of these things that he repeats across throughout the poem. So this is a kind of nervous mannerism. All the words he repeats are associated with the Duchess as if he's obsessed and can't stop thinking about things going over and over in his mind. So remember, although the narrative is based loosely on chronicled events in Renaissance Italy, this is a fictional character that has been created by Browning, and this idiolect is Browning's interpretation. Okay, now then we move on to how people and relationships are realised. So we've got this tone of conversational intimacy that the Duke has with the emissary. We've got a lot of imperatives, notice Neptune, make sure you're looking. He uses dramatic pauses, these hyphens and semicolons to break up the rhythm. We have an AABB rhyme scheme, which is all about control. We have this iambic pentameter, which is this conversational kind of rhythm, this conversational meter. But we have enjambment. And we also have the masculine interruption to the iambic pentameter. So this is when we're stressing the first syllable of the line. For example, when he says, "And I choose never to stoop." So we've got some disruptions here that maybe hint at some instability, some lack of control. The register changes. It's evidenced in a shift from the dispassionate tone he has at the beginning to this apparent lack of control when he's listing the Duchess's faults. He seems to get carried away and lose a bit of control and then kind of collects himself and returns to normal. It's quite disturbing, actually, this ability to switch between, psychotic and normal. He has this obsession with stature, wealth, and possession. He name drops Fra Pandolf. He name drops the sculptor. We also have this cyclical nature, this idea that he's always going back to it. So he's got My Last Duchess at the beginning, For Me at the end. It's all about himself, putting himself in the deictic centre of his own world. He's meant to be focused on his new bride, not going on and on about his last Duchess. So is this lack of control a calculated revelation? Is he just pretending to lose control as a way or means of getting his point across? Or is he really that unhinged that he just can't control himself? This is something that we can decide for ourselves and argue in our own way. So, what about context? Well, whilst we do need to be aware of contextual influences, we don't treat them in quite the overt way that we would do with our GCSEs. Browning himself said that he didn't want to be present in his work. These are fictional creations separate from himself. But we can look at some ideas that he had that will help us understand why he would have created the Duke in the way that he did. So he was critical of the Victorian patriarchal values and male control. Think about the father of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who he married. He had to elope with her so that they could be together. He was very against this and the 19th century expectations of women. So he had a great deal of respect for Elizabeth as a poet of equal, if not even better, stature than himself. We have this idea that in Victorian times, women didn't really have a voice. They were represented and presented through the eyes of men, which is something that, Browning didn't really agree with. Then we come to our historical accuracy. So Browning was fascinated with the Renaissance period. He'd visited Italy before, and then obviously he and Elizabeth lived there. So he did considerable amount of reading about his history. So he must have come across this biography of Alfonso II, the Duke de Ferrara, who married Lucrezia de' Medici, 14-year-old daughter of the Medicis. The poems Duke and his last Duchess, the Count whose servant is there discussing the marriage, the dowry, the fair daughter, they're all historical facts, but the interpretation of what actually took place is Browning's own interpretation. So, in an interview, Browning was asked about the portrayal of the Duchess by the Duke. He was asked,
"Was she in fact shallow and easily and equally well pleased with any favour, or did the Duke so describe her as a supercilious cover to real and well-justified jealousy?"
And Browning replies,
as an excuse, mainly to himself, for taking revenge on one who had unwittingly wounded his absurdly pretentious vanity by failing to recognize his superiority in even the most trifling matters.
He was then asked,
"What did you mean by 'I gave commands'?"
And Browning cryptically replies,
"I meant that the commands were that she should be put to death, or he might have had her shut up in a convent."
So, whichever interpretation of that you choose to go with, either way, women who don't behave as expected are a problem, and the problem has to be made to disappear. This is an archaic view of women that Browning disagreed with. I wouldn't go so far as to say he was a proto feminist, but he certainly supported and advocated for women and disapproved of this patriarchal ideology. Okay, so that's a bit of chat about the poem and some context. Let's have a look at some annotations. You might want to grab some highlighters if you're going to annotate along with me. Of course, You can pause as we go along, and I'll try my best to explain my annotations in as succinct a way as I can. Okay, so if we take the title, My Last Duchess, we've got our possessive pronoun. I probably wouldn't place too much stress on that because it's quite normal to describe somebody you're in a relationship with my, isn't it? My husband, my wife. But we do have that possessive pronoun, which adds to the rest of it. So, my last Duchess, this pre modifying adjective implying that there was one before, there'll be one next, it's one of a line, and the use of Duchess rather than her actual name. She's just fulfilling a social position. Her name isn't really important. Okay, then we've got the spatial deixis of on the wall, and this is where we've got this masculine rhythm, looking. So we've got that stress on the first syllable, which already breaks up our iambic pentameter. And this idea of looking has got a double meaning. So looking as in seeming, but also looking as those eyes would want to do while she was alive, looking around, looking at him. So perhaps she's making him feel guilty by staring at him, and that's why he has to have her covered up. We don't know. Then we've got looking as if she were alive. This is a conditional statement that establishes she's dead. Straight away, it sets the tone, looking as if she were alive, but she's not. And then we've got, I call that piece. So that piece, is it the portrait or the Duchess? Again, we've got double meaning. A piece could also refer to somebody who's a bit of a prostitute or a bit of a wanton woman. So it could be a derogatory term as well. So I call that piece a wonder now. Name dropping, Frau Pandolf, worked busily a day. And then we've got this politeness maxim. Will please you sit and look at her? So, will please you is an invitation, but actually it's the imperative that's important. Sit and look at her. We've got this spatial deixis established. We know there's a chair. We know he's sitting, he's lower, and he's looking up, both at the portrait and, of course, at the Duke. Then we talk about Frau Pandolf, and they'd never read Strangers Like You, that pictured countenance, the depth and passion. We've got abstract nouns here, which are kind of ironic given that he seems to lack depth and passion. Then our use of the object pronoun its earnest glance. Again, this is not personal, is it? It's not giving it human characteristics, making it an object. And then, of course, this parenthetical aside, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. This repetition of the personal pronoun, this deictic centre, he's at the centre of everything. Then we move on, and seemed as if they would ask me if they durst. The subordinate clause here implies that he commands fear, durst meaning if they dare. So somebody would ask me, if they dare to ask me, how such a glance came there. And this use of the determiner such creates a bit of a disappointed tone. So how such a glance came there. And then he says, so not the first of you to turn and ask us. Well, he hasn't asked anything as far as we know. So again, we've got this idea that it's all about the Duke, nobody else involved. Then we've got this third person, this distancing. 'Twas not her husband's presence only. He's removing himself personally from the situation and emotionally from the situation. So it was not her husband's presence that called that spot of joy. So we've got this connotation of blood, and we've got this enjambment here as well. Called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. And then we've got this, perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, this modality, it seems casual or incidental, but actually it just shows how much thought he's given this. He's able to come up with some direct speech that he's attributing to Frau Pandolf. It also adds a bit of credulity and reality to the situation. If we're quoting people, it adds credence to his story, doesn't it? And then Frau Pandolf might have said that he can never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. So again, we've got this semantic feel, this motif of death. Is it subconscious or is he doing it on purpose? And then such stuff was courtesy, she thought. What about agency here? This is not her voice. He is attributing her thoughts. So this idea that women don't have a voice, this is what he thinks she thinks. We don't know what she thought. And then we've got this conversational filler here. A heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad. This conversational filler, this epistemic modality, it creates negative shading as if he's a bit unsure. But is that fake? Or is it allowing him some thinking time to stop himself from saying something a bit more direct? Because he then goes on to say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. This pre-modifying adverb, very negative, too easily, too soon. She's not satisfactory as a female. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. This use of hyperbole, this is betraying the depth of feeling that he had about her. And then he says this exclamative, "Sir, 'twas all one." So, it's betraying emotion, but it's also reminding us that he's talking to somebody. He's not just rambling on by himself. He's addressing this to this emissary who's going to pass it on. And it's almost like he's looking for some kind of support from the emissary, some agreement. So you think it was all one, my favourite at breast, the drop of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherry, some officious fool. So he's very disparaging of other people who might be around the Duchess. Maybe he was jealous. Maybe this officious fool was, a handsome young man and he was jealous of him. We don't know. Then we have this complementary rhyme of fool and mule to kind of add to the disparagement of this person. And then moving on, we've got all of these were the same. She treated everything the same. Would draw an approving speech or blush at least. Again, we've got more connotations of blood going on here. So there's definitely a theme running through this. And you've got more negative shading with, I know not how. Of course he knows how. He's been thinking about it a lot, hasn't he? As if she ranked my gift. So again, we've got this Lexis of status. She has to appreciate the great honour that he's doing him, his rank, and she isn't ranking it, his gift, high enough. Okay, so we've got this 900 years old name with anybody's gift. And then we start to think about this stooping. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling rhetorical question? He doesn't require an answer. He already knows what he thinks. And then again, this direct address, even had you skill in speech, which I have not. Well, he's doing quite a good job, isn't he? Bit of false modesty to make him seem more approachable, more likeable, maybe. So even if you have skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear. So we can look at some stylistics here. Quite clear, plosive alliteration denotes some aggression. And then that's followed up with to such an one. More disparaging, impersonal references. It's distancing the Duchess as a person. Such an one. Very dismissive. And say just this or that and you disgust me. Think of that. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessened so. So we've got this homophone here, lessened as in to be taught, but also lessened being diminished. She needs to be taken down. She needs to be reduced. So she might let herself be lessened, or alternatively, she might plainly set her wits to yours. She might argue with you and try to explain herself. How dare she? Forsooth, you've got this internal rhyme. Forsooth, the maid excuse. Keeps the rhythm going, keeps us driving forward with the narrative here. Even then would be some stooping. So he wouldn't even bring himself to tell her what she's doing wrong. She should know what she's doing wrong. She's a woman of the Renaissance. She should have been brought up as any young woman to please her husband, to know how to behave. He shouldn't have to tell her. So that's stooping. So again, this metaphorical and physical kind of stature. And then he says, and I choose. He has the power and agency. The Duchess does not. I choose And then we've got that masculine interruption, never to stoop. So we've got the fronting of this modal masculine interruption of the rhythm and the repetition of stoop. He's really, really making his point very, very clear. And then he talks about his insecurity. Whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? He's really complaining. Um, and then he breaks the rhythm. Whenever I passed her, semicolon, but who passed without much the same smile? Stop. This grew. Stop. I gave commands. Stop. Then all smiles stop together. We've got a lot of caesura in here, this break in rhythm. Is he losing control? Is he feeling very passionate when he remembers this? Then he talks about his commands. Suddenly he goes cold. There's no sense of remorse or emotion. I gave commands. Then all smiles stop together. And that's an end to it. This natural consequence of his displeasure. And we have this sibilants and plosives, all smiles stopped together. Sounds very sinister, doesn't it? And then he kind of moves on. Oh, anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, there she stands anyway, as if she was alive. Well, please your eyes. He just kind of almost switches off his fury and his obsession and just goes back into normal mode. It's very unsettling. So there she sounds, this anaphorical reference referring back to the beginning of the poem, quite casual, as if alive. Yeah, that's what I was saying, wasn't it? Will please you rise? Again, more obligation. We'll meet the company below then, I repeat. Then he starts talking about the Count. The Count, your master's known munificence, his generosity, is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for a dowry will be disallowed. So basically, it's a power play, structurally. He's just talked about his last Duchess. She was a bit displeasing. She came to a sticky end. Oh, by the way, though, I'm sure your master, the Count, he's going to be generous. It won't matter how much I ask for as a dowry. I'm sure he'll give me whatever I want. Or else is the kind of parenthesis there. And then he kind of tries to reverse it a little bit. Of course, though, it's your daughter that I'm really interested in. She's my object. Oop, is that a Freudian slipped? Double meaning. He's a bit of a collector, isn't he? My object meaning the thing I want, but also maybe the thing to add to my collection. And it's juxtaposed very closely with this rare art, this Neptune taming a seahorse. So in his mind, is he connecting wives with objects, possessions, art, beautiful things to have around him? So we've got my object, nay will go down together, sir. Then another imperative, notice. Neptune, though, taming a seahorse. Again, fronting, controlling language that's masculine, taming, that stress on the first syllable. Taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck, name dropper, cast in bronze for me. The cyclical anaphoric ending betrays his ego. All right, so to return to our earlier assessment of the Duke's character, I hope you can see through these annotations that these traits are exemplified, that we talked about earlier on, this pride, control, psychotic behaviour. And I hope you can see how the combination of stylistics and literary terminology works. So this poem would, of course, be a perfect pairing in any question that deals with power, masculinity, passion, relationships, objectification, representation of women, violence, psychotic behaviour. It's got loads of things it can match up with. It's a really juicy poem. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed working through it with me. I certainly enjoyed it. So, as I say, I hope you found this tutorial useful. Please do leave a message in the comments. Please like and subscribe. If there's any other poems you'd like me to do next, please say so. So thanks again for watching and see you next time.